you say you want to forget, that you're ready to move on. But if that's true, why do you still think about them every single day? Why does your heart still race at the sound of a message, secretly hoping it's them, even knowing they hurt you? Why do you still feel that magnetic pull? The answer is painful, but necessary. You don't miss them. You miss the version of them that existed in your mind. The version you built out of hope, longing, and unhealed wounds. Carl Jung once said, "What we do not face in ourselves, we will meet as fate." And perhaps that's exactly what's happening now. What you're attached to isn't the person, it's the emotional mirage, the version of love your mind created to survive loneliness, not the real person standing in front of you. This isn't just heartbreak. This is your unconscious trying to wake you up. So ask yourself, was it fate that brought you pain? Or a pattern you've never broken? If you're ready to see beyond the illusion, to understand the hidden psychology of why we cling to those who hurt us most, then subscribe now. Because what I'm about to reveal will expose the unconscious patterns that keep you trapped in emotional cycles you never chose. If it was never about them, then what exactly were you holding on to? To understand that, we have to step deeper into the hidden theater of the mind. Have you ever asked yourself, what exactly were you in love with? Because if you look closely, it probably wasn't the person. It was the story, the version of them that existed in your mind, not in reality. Carl Jung said we fall in love, not with people, but with projections, pieces of ourselves we've lost, that we cast onto someone else, hoping they'll complete the picture. It becomes a kind of emotional theater. Your mind writes the script. Your past selects the cast, and the other person, they just play the role you've unconsciously assigned them. This is why we're often drawn to people who aren't safe, but familiar. Familiar in the way old wounds feel predictable, even when they hurt. You may fall for someone distant or cold, not because you enjoy the pain, but because it mirrors something from long ago. A parent, a figure who was just out of emotional reach, and now your mind tries to resolve it through them. This is what Jung called psychic projection. We see the other, not as they are, but as a mirror of our own unmet needs. The anima, the animus, archetypes of the masculine and feminine, shaped in the earliest chapters of our life. They carry our longing, our fears, or deepest emotional imprints. And when someone reflects those back to us, we feel pulled in, as if fate has arrived. But it isn't fate. It's reenactment. What starts as admiration slowly becomes obsession. Because the moment they stop fulfilling the fantasy, you feel betrayed. Not by them, but by the collapse of a dream. A version of yourself you thought was whole, only when seen through their eyes. That's the part that hurts most. You're not just losing someone. You're losing who you believed you were, when they were still playing their role. Love, in this case, is not mutual. It's one-sided reflection, a longing for closure with a past you never got to finish. And as long as you search for wholeness out there, you'll keep falling into the same trap. Different faces. Same story. You weren't addicted to them. You were addicted to the feeling of being enough, reflected in someone else's eyes. That's why letting go feels impossible. You weren't attached to them. You were attached to the version that felt like hope. It was never about them. It was about what they awakened, what they represented, and what your unconscious was still trying to find in someone else. But to keep that illusion alive, you had to change, to mold yourself into what they wanted, even if it meant abandoning who you truly are. At some point in your life, you learned a dangerous lesson, that love is something you earn by becoming who others want you to be. Maybe it wasn't said out loud. Maybe it came through glances, expectations, or the silence that followed your truth. But the message was clear. If you want to be accepted, you have to perform. So you adapted. You adjusted. You became what was needed, not what was real. Carl Jung called this adaptation the persona, a mask, a social identity carefully crafted to survive in a world that demands conformity. The persona isn't inherently bad. It allows you to function, to belong. But the danger comes when you forget it's a mask and start believing it's all you are. In relationships shaped by emotional dependency, this false self takes over. You dim your light to keep the other close. You silence your pain, soften your truth, abandon your needs, all in the name of connection. But what kind of connection demands your disappearance? This isn't love. It's emotional survival. It's what psychologists call a fawning response, a trauma-driven instinct to please, to appease, to make yourself small enough to be tolerated. And with each act of self-erasure, you chip away at your core. A slow erosion that eventually leaves you unsure of who you are. Without their gaze to define you, you begin to depend on their reactions, like a mirror that tells you whether you matter or not. But that mirror is cracked. Each time you say, "I'm fine," when you're breaking inside, and you drive a deeper fracture into your sense of self. You learn to scan the room, but forgot how to feel yourself. You shapeshift to avoid conflict. You offer peace while hiding your war. And over time, you start to forget what your voice sounds like when it isn't filtered through fear. The validation you crave becomes addictive. Not because it fulfills you, but because without it, you feel invisible. It's like trying to feed your soul with smoke. You breathe in approval, but you never feel full. Because no amount of praise can fill the emptiness left by a self you abandoned. And this is where the cycle tightens. You stay quiet to avoid rejection. But the more you abandon yourself, the more disconnected you feel. And that disconnection breeds anxiety. Not just emotional discomfort, but a full-body signal that your truth is suffocating under the weight of performance. You don't fear losing them. You fear the collapse of the identity you built to keep them. And when your identity is built on reflection, even silence becomes terrifying. That terror, it has a name: anxiety. But this isn't weakness. It's a symptom of a deeper split between who you are and who you think you need to be to feel loved. But when your truth is buried long enough, the body doesn't stay silent. That's when anxiety appears, not as a flaw, but as your soul's final scream. What I'm about to show you next will completely reframe how you see anxiety, not as your enemy, but as your inner compass pointing you home. Subscribe and stay with me, because understanding this will be the key to breaking free from emotional patterns that have controlled your life for far too long. You call it anxiety. But what if it's something else? What if it's not a malfunction, but a message? Not a weakness, but a warning. The truth is, your anxiety didn't begin with them leaving. It began when you left yourself. You feel lost, not because they're gone, but because in trying to keep them, you abandoned who you were. In psychology, this is called internal fragmentation. It's what happens when the self is divided, when the person you show to the world isn't the same as the one screaming quietly inside. That tension builds. That split widens. And eventually, your nervous system sounds the alarm. Anxiety isn't random. It's not just a fear of rejection or abandonment. It's the physical signal of a psychological conflict between the false self you perform and the true self you've suppressed. Imagine your life as a house. On the surface, everything looks organized, but there's a locked room in the back where your unmet needs, silenced emotions, and neglected truth have been hiding for years. And every time you say "I'm fine" when you're not, you push that door a little tighter, closed. But the pressure doesn't disappear. It builds. And eventually, it leaks through as restlessness, insomnia, panic, fear. This is the birth of what I call the ghost self, the version of you left behind when you tried to become lovable at the expense of being whole. Anxiety is the knock on the door from the part of you left behind, and the direction it points, always inward. You see, deep inside, you lives a conflict between two powerful voices: the inner child, who longs to be seen, accepted, and protected, and the inner critic, shaped by years of rejection, who says, "You're too much, too needy, too flawed to be loved." Anxiety is the battlefield between the two. It shows up as overthinking, hypervigilance, obsessive checking, not because you're broken, but because you're out of alignment. Ask yourself, what if your anxiety isn't dysfunction, but disconnection? What if it's the only part of you that still refuses to lie? Because while you keep looking outward for stability for their message, their approval, their attention, your anxiety keeps pulling you back to the place you've been avoiding yourself. And here's the truth no one talks about. Anxiety isn't cured by reassurance from someone else. It's healed by reconciliation with your own truth. Only when you stop betraying your needs, only when you stop abandoning your inner voice, does the signal begin to quiet. Because anxiety, in its purest form, isn't here to destroy you. It's here to redirect you It is the map that forms the moment you stop pretending and start listening. It's not a curse. It's the call to come home. But who built this map in the first place? Who's been choosing the same kind of pain over and over again? It's time to look at the part of you you've buried, the deepest. You think you're choosing who to love, but most of the time, it's your shadow that's choosing for you. Carl Jung defined the shadow as everything within you that has been rejected, denoué, or buried. All the parts you were told were too loud, too emotional, too selfish, too much. And so, to survive, you push those parts out of sight. But what you repress doesn't disappear. It waits. It watches. And eventually, it takes the stage. And the stage it loves most is your relationships. That's why you're drawn to the same patterns, the same pain, over and over again. You call it chemistry, but it's just your nervous system recognizing a familiar kind of pain. You keep finding yourself with emotionally unavailable partners, with controlling personalities, with people who make you feel invisible, and it feels personal, but it's not personal. It's psychological. Let me give you an example. If you were raised to believe that owning your voice was dangerous, that having power meant punishment, you may unconsciously seek out partners who dominate you. Not because you want to be controlled, but because the part of you that longs for power has been disowned. And until that power is reclaimed within, you will find it in the people who take it from you. This is what makes love feel like a ritual of pain. It becomes a ceremony in which you summon the very energy you've spent your life trying to suppress. Your shadow becomes the unseen author writing the script for your heart, casting familiar roles, and pulling you into a narrative that feels inevitable. But it's not fate. It's repetition. And repetition is the soul's cry to be seen. Because until you confront the parts of you that you've exiled, you will keep attracting people who carry them. You will hate in them what you refuse to face in yourself. And you will love in them what you've abandoned in your own life. This is why healing doesn't begin with walking away. It begins with walking inward. Because the shadow doesn't just want to sabotage you. It wants to be acknowledged. And Jung said it best: what you resist persists, but what you accept transforms. So, ask yourself, what are you running from in you that you keep chasing in someone else? What part of you have you silenced that now only feels alive in the chaos of the relationship? Until you answer these questions, you will mistake trauma for passion, conflict for connection, and control for care. Because the shadow doesn't show up to ruin your life. It shows up to wake you up. And its method is repetition. But once you've seen your shadow, truly seen it, you have a choice. Not to fix the other, but to return to yourself. And that journey begins with truth. There comes a point in this journey when pretending no longer works, when the pain of staying fragmented becomes greater than the fear of becoming whole. This is where true healing begins. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of integrating the unconscious into consciousness. of dissolving the mask and becoming who you were always meant to be. It is not about self-improvement. It is about self-reclamation. Because healing is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you were before the world told you to be someone else. Individuation starts the moment you stop chasing people who don't see you, and instead turn inward to see yourself clearly without distortion. It begins when you stop begging for affection and start setting boundaries, not to punish others, but to protect the truth you've finally come home to. It's in those quiet moments when you choose silence over explanation, distance over desperation, integrity over approval, that the real self begins to emerge. And that self is not fragile. It does not need validation to feel worthy. It does not chase chaos to feel alive. It no longer asks to be chosen because it has already chosen itself. This is the turning point, when the part of you that used to cling lets go, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You start to realize you were never asking them to love you. You were asking them to make you feel real, to mirror back a self you had abandoned long ago. But now you don't need the mirror. You've become the witness, the observer, the one who sees, holds, and honors what was lost. It is here that you burn the old script, the one you never wrote, but lived anyway. The script that told you to shrink, to please, to earn love by erasing yourself. And in the ashes, you begin to write something new. Not a story of survival, but of sovereignty. You no longer shapeshift for love. You embody it. You no longer beg for connection. You become it. This is what it means to come home, not to a place, but to a self you almost forgot existed. A self that was never broken, only buried beneath expectation, fear, and false roles. Jung said that individuation is the realization of the self, the core of who you are, freed from the mask of the persona and the grip of the shadow. And when you reach this place, you no longer confuse suffering with love. You no longer tether your worth to someone else's recognition, because you are finally rooted in something that cannot be taken away yourself. Now that you've returned home, what do you do with the past, the love that hurt, the person you clung to? You don't erase them, you release them. If this journey has shown you something you needed to see if you're ready to stop carrying what was never yours to hold, then subscribe now. Because learning to let go isn't just about ending one relationship. It's about transforming your relationship with yourself. And that transformation changes everything. You've made it this far not because you're weak, but because deep down, you already knew something had to change. Maybe you couldn't name the pain. Maybe you thought it was neediness, or failure, or dependency. But now, you know the truth. It wasn't weakness. It was the voice of your soul calling you home. Letting go isn't about forgetting. It's not about pretending it didn't hurt. It's about choosing to stop carrying what was never yours to hold. It's about reclaiming the space in your life. that was occupied by absence. And today, I want you to mark that choice with something real. Not just a thought, but a ritual. In the comments, leave a sentence that feels like a final breath. Let it be your ritual of release. Say it like you mean it. Say it like you're speaking directly to yourself. It could be as simple as I release you, and I return to me. Each word you write is not for them. It's for you. It's a contract. A private commitment made in public. Not to erase the past, but to honor what you've learned from it. And to finally walk forward. This was the goodbye. And in your silence, the beginning begins.